We spoke yesterday, I believe, didn't we? And actually, whilst we were talking about Gary Glitter appearing to breach his licence conditions, well, it turned out that he was being recalled to prison at that time. So, you know, you were right to raise all the points that you did raise, but it does make me wonder, what would your view be about the fact that he was ever allowed out in the first place?
I think this is a really difficult issue in terms of the question of rehabilitation of sex offenders, and I don't think it's necessarily, a one-size-fits-all solution. I certainly think it depends on the level of offending, and I think we need to be honest about that. There is a spectrum of offending when it comes to sexual abuse. I think we also need to take into account, particularly in the case of Gary Glitter, that he's never shown any remorse for what he's done, and he's refused to participate in treatment programs while in prison. And I think those factors are things that need to be considered when we're looking at whether this is a person who should, in fact, ever be released.
I'm going to talk shortly to a psychologist on this to get the kind of mental health analysis. I'm going to talk to a former police officer as well to get the police side of things. In your view, you work a lot with victims, presumably, abuse victims. What do they want done when it comes to cases like this? I'm just going to emphasise again with Gary Glitter here, 16-year jail term for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls, no remorse, as you've said, jailed in 2015, attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault, 1 of having sex with a girl under the age of 13. What do your victims want done here, the victims you deal with, I should rephrase?
I think the victims that I deal with, first of all, as a starting point, want someone to acknowledge what's happened to them and apologize for it in the context of the civil justice system, which is what I work within. In the context of the criminal justice system, obviously, they want the perpetrator to be convicted and to serve their sentence. And so I think when you look at this case where he's received a 16-year sentence and only served 8, again, looking at the other factors that I mentioned, where he's shown no remorse and has refused to participate in treatment programs, that's a real issue for the victims and survivors that I act on behalf of.
In your view, do you think that it's too easy for people to game the system? I've had people get in touch claiming to work in wings of prisons and other groups as well, where they say that some kind of quotes-unquote rehabilitation exercises that take place essentially teach paedophiles what to say in order to be able to be released.
Yeah, I've heard that before, too. I think there's some concerns around a bunch of pedophiles being in prison together and getting together and swapping notes, and that's something that you hear often. I think another thing that we need to look at is the fact that pedophiles are allowed to change their names when they're released from prison, and we're relying on them to then notify probation that they've changed their name. So, there's a lot of issues around this entire system that we as a society really need to get to grips with in order to keep kids safe.
Yeah, indeed. And look, do you see, in your own experience working in this field, do you see high rates of reoffending? Do you see people who almost compulsively can't help themselves from behaving like this?
I do. I mean, I often say when I'm working with clients, sadly, you really rarely ever see just one victim. And sadly, what often happens is that you see that there were victims and people knew about the abuse and could have done something about it and didn't. And that includes institutions, very much so. And then it meant that there were many, many more victims that followed. So in my experience, it's very rare to see just one victim. And so I think that that does really answer the question of reoffending. These people are sick and frankly, they're predators. I mean, I think that's really how we need to describe them, and we need to think of them in those terms.